Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining, Nancy.
It looks like, is that
Kevin.
Mike as Kevin or is that someone else?
I don't know. I don't know the name. Kevin Van Blarkum. Awesome. I'm in the waiting room. Okay, he's in the waiting room.
Oh, that's him. Yeah, that's him.
I'm here. Here I am.
Hey, Mike. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very, very well. Very well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
This is awesome. And I think so. We'll be streaming this via Instagram if not already. Mike, I see you're in the brew room.
I am in the brewery.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. This is so cool. So let me just make sure that we are streaming. Yes, we're live. Okay, wonderful. So we may get questions off Instagram. We'll see what happens. And so everyone's a beer fan here, Mike. I have to say, everybody likes beer who's around right now. So we have a lot to talk about. So I wanted to kind of start off with a bit of we'll get to housekeeping in a minute. On Saturday, there's going to be community gardens preparation all around Lexington that's led by Lynn Byrne. Lynn Byrne is an active community member, and she's been actively pushing for beautification plants and everything. So that's going to be on Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Everyone's meeting at the Lexington Town Hall. And so tonight we have Mike Barcone. Mike Barcone is a Westkill Brewery founder, and along with his wife Colleen, started the brewery a few years back and have done an amazing job turning that part of the mountainside into a really busy, beautiful place to have a beer. So I guess, would you like to introduce yourself, Mike? And
Sure. I just want to double check that my audio sounds good. We are carbonating a beer behind me, so it's not too loud, but I just want to make sure everybody's good.
Yeah, to me, you sound perfect. So it's
awesome.
Great.
Awesome. So a little bit about me. I grew up here in Westkill. My grandparents were always here, but we moved up here when I was 9. And then I went through middle school, high school up here, left Westkill to live in Boston. Lived in Boston for almost 10 years. And while I was there, I went to college, but also met my wife. And then I worked in public history. And then I also was a high school history teacher for 4 years in Boston public schools. That's just a very brief overview of me, who I am. My wife and I returned back in short order. We returned back. I left teaching. We returned back to open the brewery. It was in that time of opening the brewery that I was asked by our then town supervisor, Dixie Baldry, to run for town council. This was just a little under 8 years ago now. And so I joined the town council 8 years ago. And slowly my wife and I went through the entire grueling process of opening a business in the Catskill watershed. So
yeah, which is no small feat, right? Because there's so many layers of regulation and mostly environmental care. And do you want to talk about that? What was the most difficult thing in that process?
I would say, hands down, our wastewater treatment system was the hardest hurdle to get over. So we're in the DEP watershed for New York City. So the Westkill flows into the Schoharie, which goes into the Schoharie Reservoir, and then goes down through a pipeline to the Ashokan, and then feeds down to the city. So, and any ounce of surface water and groundwater is protected. You have to go through various hoops. And when we started, we were in a very unique position because there were other kind of semi-similar brewing, and not they weren't breweries, but they were semi-similar like industrial businesses in the Catskills, but there were no breweries. So while Catskill Brewery had just opened, they weren't in the watershed at that time. And there was nothing really else within the park that wasn't on a sewer system. So what was really unique about our project was that we were in the middle of nowhere on this kind of very rural property. And so we had to deal with what we all know of as a septic system. And at first we were told a lot of different things. We were told like, oh, well, you don't need to do that much, just a holding tank, and then they'll pump it and haul it away, things like that. And so we started to proceed, and we realized very early dealing with this issue that the first hurdle we were going to have to cross, because it was the Achilles heel of the whole operation, was going to be dealing with the watershed and the DEP. So we ended up hiring a very large engineering firm out of Albany called Delaware Engineering, and paid them a very large amount of money to work with a company called Aquapoint to design a wastewater treatment system for us. And so once that process went through, we came to realize that we'd done all this work, and lo and behold, the watershed of New York really can only regulate human waste. It can't regulate anything that's waste that's not from the human body, right? So we kind of did all this work for what we thought the watershed would want. And really they had no say in the matter. But what ended up happening was the Department of Environmental Conservation, who's usually much easier to deal with, was the final say in that regard. And they just decided to piggyback on what we had already done. So when we gave them our proposal, they were like, well, you guys have already done all this work, so, you might as well just do this. So we got our equipment made, or I should say the wastewater system made. They came and inspect the installation of it, and we went through there. But all in all, that process took almost 3 years. Wow. From start to finish to deal with that system.
That seems, that's extraordinarily painful. But I think at the end of the day, you have one of the most beautiful views of any tap room. So in the end, would you do it again?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And all in all, everything we did was to keep our water clean and to keep everything around us safe. So it was the right thing to do regardless. It's just a very long process because you're dealing with a lot of bureaucratic institutions, and it just takes a lot of time for things to be reviewed. Right. So the Department of Environmental Conservation was really nice and let us put in our big 3,000 gallon holding tank underground. And so we were allowed to begin brewing before the system was done. We just had to have that tank pumped every time it got full. So we were able to kind of like hit the ground running and start running with that. So yeah, that was our biggest hurdle to deal with, most definitely.
Yeah, and you've done a lot to popularize that part of the valley, right? I went there recently, and for anybody who hasn't been there, it's the longest dead end that I've ever driven, I think. And it's a beautiful road. But I remember asking my buddy Roman, who's actually here on this chat, who's a beer judge, and I asked him to ask some questions that were relevant to beer. But I remember driving, and it's a beautiful drive, but it's hard to. At one point, I wasn't sure if we were already there or had maybe passed the brewery, but it's when you get there, it's pretty magical. And that's something you've done. You've drawn people to the valley and been able to introduce a lot of people to that area, right? Absolutely.
I mean, so a lot of people ask, it happens all the time. Why here? Why are you here? Like, would this make, to some people, they're just blown away. They're like, how does this even work? Well, number one, it was my family's property since 1929. So my family had it for a very long time. And it was really my father who prodded the idea of utilizing the property for another means, to try to get the property to sustain itself. We have a lot of acreage here. So, in order to get that to, we had a maple syrup farm for a while that helped take care of that a little bit with ag taxes and things like that. But the property really, when you have that much land, it's kind of that like old, very, very much old European view of like, well, if you have a lot of land, the land has to sustain itself in some way, or else, you can't hang on to it. So I was homebrewing in my apartment in Boston for many years and doing some volunteer work at breweries. And so he was the one who really facilitated the idea. That was part one. Part two was my wife and I are avid hikers, avid outdoors people. And we were going up to the White Mountains of New Hampshire. We were going to Maine every weekend from Boston. And when we would go up to these little towns, there were breweries. And I was just blown away that the Catskills hadn't had something along those lines at that time. And right now we're talking about like 2012. So that started getting the idea turning. And then we came back here for a summer and lived here for a summer. And it was the summer of 2012, actually. And I was absolutely blown away by the traffic on Spruceton Road for the hiking trails. I mean, it was insane. It still is. And that's what kind of sparked the idea of like, okay, well, let me think about myself as a customer. Well, number one, I've traveled to the far corners of Maine to get beer, so I'm not worried about getting customers to come to me. Secondly, I'm a hiker, and what do I want to do after I was in a hike on the White Mountains? I wanted to get a beer. And third, I knew that if I could make a great product, why wouldn't someone want to come and share in it? And I saw how popular the Catskills were becoming, and well, if we brew a beer from the Catskills, why wouldn't people in New York City or the Hudson Valley want that beer as well at their restaurants and bars? So I really truly believed from day one that the business could sustain itself at this location. And it's blown my expectations completely out of the water. But the pieces were all there. It wasn't a situation where I just showed up one day and it was like, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but we have to try. We had an idea that it would become something, or at the very least could maintain and sustain itself. Right,
because of the traffic. So primarily because of people hiking and going to.
And I'd still say on a weekend, 30% of our traffic is hikers still.
Right. That's so true. What did the hikers do before you were there? What do you think? Where did they go?
They just I don't know. Brios. I feel like I think they went down to Phoenicia, or they went into Hunter, and they got a beer and something to eat, and that was it. Right. I think people have always been so used to driving in the Catskills that it's just you're like, hey, it's going to take me at least 20 minutes to get anywhere. So I think it was a surprise when this just popped up one day, and people were like, oh, wait a minute, I can do Westkill or Hunter Mountain and then have a really very quickly have a beer afterwards. That's amazing.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I understand. I think I read something in an article that was about Westkill. Your family owned Spruceton Inn previously and sold it to
my uncle did. Yeah. So my uncle bought Sunshine Valley House from the Schwarzeneggers. He was back in 2003.
From the Schwarzeneggers.
From the Schwarzeneggers, yeah. So they bought it and had it for 10 years before they sold it to Casey and Stephen. Casey Cheska and Stephen Weinberg.
And so this idea of building community, it's important to you clearly, and you're in town governance. So Dixie, how did Dixie convince you to I mean, nobody wants to run for public office if they don't have to. Like, why what drove you?
Don't.
Why did you do this to yourself?
So I'd always been, I studied political science in college. I had, when I was in a high school history teacher, I taught Model UN, and I was a coach. I was a coach for mock trial programs. So without ever really, I was always, involved with the community back here, and I was involved with community organizations in Boston. But when I came back and she pulled me in, it was for her at that time, this is right before the big surge, right? So this is right before basically you get the big New York City, Brooklyn migration kind of coming upstate, right? Where people are starting to leave the city. They're starting to kind of feel a little constrained, and they're seeing business opportunity in the Catskills and the Hudson Valley. So she kind of felt at the time that, there had been a lot of voices on the town board for 20 some years even, and that they needed to have a younger individual on the board. Before I had left, I was very involved in high school in the Community Improvement Association. I mowed people's lawns. I did snow plowing with my father, for neighbors. I was pretty well known in the community, even while I was gone. And so she just felt it was a natural fit. It's something that she really felt that we needed moving forward.
Yeah, and I see that. I've seen interaction at town board meetings, and it is it's clear that you have a good heart and interest in what happens to the community. So it's exciting to see that the brewery's doing so well and it's contributing so much. What do you see about the future of Lexington? Where do you see the future going?
So what's really exciting to me is, when my wife and I moved back here, there was nobody within, really truly, there was almost nobody within a 15 to 20 year age bracket of us when we first moved back. And then Casey and Steven moved in of Spruceton Inn, and then slowly like younger families over time have come in. So a huge part of what I see as the future of Lexington is just young full-time couples coming in, and or single folks just coming in and really wanting to get involved and taking the reins. And I think that that's very important for the future of Lexington. There's a lot of people who have been doing a lot of work in this town for many, 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 many years. And, eventually they're going to want to spend more time with their grandkids, or they're going to want to spend more time with their spouses or families. And they're going to want to pull away from those roles. And we need to have people to move up and to fit into those roles to carry Lexington forward. I think that's number one. I think, number two, access to jobs, housing. We've always been like this transitional community, but people don't really want to see that anymore. People are asking for a general store. People are asking for more businesses because they want to be able to live and function and live their daily lives in the town, rather than it being just a bedroom transitional community.
There'll be a general store soon in Lexington Hamlet. I think we spoke about this briefly.
We were chatting about it. Yeah, absolutely. It's very exciting. That's
right.
Huge.
And I actually think that there should be more than one general store. I don't think there can be, and I haven't spoken to Caitlin and Will about this, but I think that there's something about walkability that's important that I think it's worthwhile bringing back. And it's a conversation that I will talk about with the board also at some point, because I think we need to all have a discussion to figure out exactly that question, because the future of Lexington really is, it needs to be something that addresses needs of everybody, and the people who have the least means should be the most, should be the focus of that discussion, really. And I think in there comes things like walkability. If you could buy milk anywhere in walkable distance from most places in Lexington, I think life for everyone is it's more convenient. Right now, I know people drive very, very far away to go shopping and things like that. But you mentioned housing also. I'm glad you mentioned it. We can talk about that very briefly or not at all if you want to, but what do you think affordable housing looks like in Lexington? How do we do that? It's a big problem, I know.
Sure. So, I don't quite know what the answer is yet, but I know that it's a discussion that a lot of communities are starting to have. One of the most interesting discussions I heard recently, I could speak from an employer standpoint, right? So take the current, social media debate about, unemployment incentives and things like that. Take that out of the equation, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So just talking about businesses in the Catskills. So one of the trends you're seeing now is you're seeing and I'll use certain hotels, for example. You'll see certain companies coming in from elsewhere. They're building or renovating hotels, and the first thing that they do is they'll buy maybe adjacent houses or adjacent property just to house their staff. Because the number one issue is that it's not that we can't find workers because nobody really wants to work. It's that there's nowhere for anybody to live. There's no, long-term rentals. And one of the most interesting discussions I've heard recently was kind of giving incentives to a lot of people who own these roadside motels that are all throughout the Catskills that are actually not really in use or not really booked, giving incentives to house restaurant or industry workers, to kind of fuel that industry, because there's not a restaurant in the Catskills right now that they can't find staff at all. One local restaurant offered flat screen TVs to anybody who took a job. It's getting to be that point. I'm very fortunate that my core team were all able to buy real estate before the pandemic. So my core 4 full-time employees were all able to find solid housing and to purchase property before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And that's obviously fueled a housing situation like crazy up here. So that's a huge issue.
It is. Yeah, I see that. And I think in some communities it turns into generally exporting labor from other places, and it creates other problems like traffic and just general unhappiness and malaise, because really quality of life is often living close to work. And it is really nice to hear that you were able to set that up before.
Yeah. And also, you're finding that businesses, any new businesses that are opening, and this is just advice out there for anybody looking to open a business, especially in the current climate, the owners are going to be employees. My wife and I are down here, we're down here 6 days a week because that's how the labor gets done, especially deliveries, things like that. You have to be part of your own labor force because it's just so hard to find anybody.
Right. Yeah, that is. Do you think that if the town grew in a way that was, again, we can talk about beer. These are questions that probably, but I think they're valuable things to think about. If the town was more dense, maybe in the hamlet, or if there were more hamlet areas in the town, because I know we're talking about, I was having a conversation with somebody today that we were talking about a new comprehensive plan for Lexington. And in the context, I think we're at an interesting moment where we can make really big decisions that make the place grow in a sustainable way, in a way that preserves quietude, preserves the things that we think are beautiful about the Catskills, and why we keep going back to places like Lexington, and why Lexington has like this old town feel, which we want to preserve, but we also want to create affordable housing. And how do you do those things? Are they at loggerheads, and how do we do it? And I think it's perhaps we need to look at things like zoning and create slightly more dense areas that are walkable to a general store. And maybe there's more than one general store. I know Mosquito Point Roadhouse, which is just basically between Lexington and Prattsville, which Lexington and Prattsville are 7 miles apart. So that's about 3.5, 4 miles out. There's no store in between those, but it used to be that Mosquito Point Roadhouse had a general store. And I imagine there were a lot of other little general stores like that maybe they were owned and operated by the same resident who lived in the place, and just opened up shop when people came by to break, because maybe it wouldn't sustain having 4 employees and a fully stocked shop that's open 9 to 5 every day. So I think the models that we think about in development for us.
Hold on 1 second, Alex. Let me just shut this overhead door. I got to.
Yeah. I'll take care of housekeeping stuff. Don't worry about it.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So we're speaking with Mike Barcone, Westkill Brewery. And if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. I wanted to let everybody know again that we have Lexington Garden Days on Saturday morning. We're meeting at 9 a.m. at the Town Hall on Route 42. And we will be doing gardening in front of the post office and in front of the church. They're 2 places that Lindburn is focused on on planting. If you'd like to join, bring some garden implements and some plants if you'd like, and we have extras that we can share. Westkill Brewery is generous in donating some beer that we can enjoy afterwards behind Lexington House, maybe by the river. And I think that's really the only housekeeping thing right now. But if you have any questions for Mike, feel free to chime in. Also via Instagram, you're welcome to do that as well. Thank you for joining us. So we were talking about things like housing and the practical aspects of town development. I want to ask you about, so let's talk beer. And Roman, if you have beer questions, please chime in. I know you have, there's a lot of collaborations that you do. I was looking at Catskill Fungi, and I think Stephen Hands, an artist who does amazing work in portraiture, fish and things. So how did these collaborations come about?
Sure. So we, in the beer world, in the food world in general, the room for collaboration is huge, right? And we're we're able to do so many cool, unique things. It's not just necessarily about the beer in the can or bottle, but it's about the artwork. It's about the event to launch that beer. There's all sorts of collaborations we can have. So Steven Weinberg, great example. Steven's a good friend, neighbor, been a neighbor for a while. And very early on, even before the brewery opened, we knew Steven would be doing some labels for us. And so we reached out to him for our Catterskill. It's a fun story. So like our number one selling beer is Catterskill IPA. In 2019, it won the silver medal at the Great American Beer Festival in the IPA category, which was huge. And I came up with the idea because I loved the name Catterskill, number one, but number two, I wanted us to make the IPA of the Catskills, or at least our IPA of the Catskills. And of course, we've got Devil's Path from Catskill and things like that. But I wanted the Northern Catskills to have their own, way of speaking, in the IPA world. So my head brewer and I sat down, formulated a recipe, created Catterskill. I approached Steven and I said, listen, I really feel like this needs to be a watercolor. And he agreed, and he had never painted Catterskill Falls, and it was a very long process, but we finally got our finished product that is now on our can. It's been a number one selling print for him. But that kind of collaboration where we get to work with an artist that is able to convey the story of the beer, but also the flavor profile of the beer. I mean, the Catterskill is canned every other week, fresh, and I feel like the label, and it sells out very quickly, the label is fresh. It feels fresh, That's just one example of our ability to collaborate. We work with another artist pretty extensively. Her name is Kelly Wills. She's from Oregon. We found Kelly on Instagram because she was doing concert posters for a musician named Tyler Childers. And so we reached out to her, connected. I've never met Kelly, but we all feel like we know each other pretty well because we share ideas. We have very long conversations. We send her beer. She sends us art. It's, again, a wonderful collaboration. But hands down, the best collaborations we do are with other breweries. It's the very unique thing about the beer industry where we all go out and we are all in competition with one another. Yet we fully understand that without one another, how are we to exist and function in the culture that is craft beer? And collaborations since day one, they've been going on for many years, has been kind of like the ceremonial way of showing that brewers get along, we're friends, we care about one another, even though we're in competition with one another. I mean, yeah, of course, I go to a bar or a restaurant, in Albany, and I'm sitting, at the bar and I see, our tap handle and I hear someone order my beer. Well, of course I'm happy, but that doesn't mean that we're not out there trying to support each other too. And that's the key about the beer industry. It's that we're all in it together and we don't want to see anybody fail. We don't want to see anybody lose. We want to help and raise each other up. And those are our best collaborations. So we've worked with many different breweries, Industrial Arts. We've worked with Bunker Brewing all the way in Maine. It's also a great way of connecting in different parts of the country, getting into different markets, meeting people from other ends of the country, sharing stories, sharing regional cultures. It's really great. It's hands down probably the best part of the whole industry.
Yeah, I think so. Roman is very involved in the beer scene in Brooklyn, and he was commenting, for example, that there's a lot of integration. There's tons of women in his beer club, which is unique in beer clubs, but apparently very common in Brooklyn. But that idea of collaboration, that it is competition, it is business at the end of the day. But you're right, it is one of these things that it is very friendly, I'm sure, because you like you said, you depend on each other for your survival. I think that's the way it is in a lot of smaller industries too, though. I think when you have, it's not like Bud versus Miller or something where like they don't care. It's sort of faceless and corporate. Beer is very personal, and I think that's it's something that Roman, would you like to chime in here because like you have
Yeah.
so much insight on this?
I'm waiting for you to stop, Alex.
Yeah,
You don't
go.
stop. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So one question I have: do you guys use local ingredients, and which ones?
Yep. So yeah, we do use quite a bit of local ingredients when we can. So for a beer like Catterskill, we don't, because it's with the amount that we brew that beer, to get New York State grains and to get New York hops, they wouldn't fit the profile, and it just wouldn't work with the volume. But we do a lot of small experimental or special release batches in which we use New York State grains, New York State hops. Our most recent, which we're really excited about, our most recent IPA release is called Fly Down IPA. In terms of turkeys fly down from a roost in the early morning. It's a turkey hunting term. And so we wanted to create a spring IPA that kind of honors the turkey. So we created this beer with all New York State grains and all New York hops, and we used some experimental New York hops because the New York has always had a hard time with growing hops that are kind of juicy and tropical, that lend themselves to the IPA game. And this farm swore up and down, they were like, these are new hybrid varieties, you got to try them. They're very much where you want them to be. And we brewed this beer and we are just like absolutely blown away with how great it is. I mean, you would think this was your typical New England hazy IPA with like Australian hops. It's unbelievable. So that beer is one example of all New York State ingredients that we use in the making of that beer. Another beer we make is called Brookie American Light Lager. That's made with all corn from the Mohawk Valley. It's an Iroquois white dent corn. So it's an heirloom variety of corn that we use in the brewing of that beer. We also make a beer called Sap House, which is a maple brown ale that we brew in the early spring, late winter, that we utilize toasted maple bark and local maple syrup in that beer as well. So we do a lot of foraged beers with mushrooms and creeping thyme and Tulsi basil. We're going to be working with Newton Farm, which is at the end of Spruceton Road this year, growing. Actually, I see Cole's on the call right now. We're going to be working with Newton Farm to grow certain herbs for us to go into different beers. So yeah, we try to use as much local stuff as we can when we can.
I read also sumac, elderberry. You grow your own. You have your own honey, right?
Yep. So yeah, we have an orchard with 38 sour cherry trees. They're in various stages of growth, so we do get some cherries. It's not enough yet. Probably by the time my daughter is in college, she's not quite 2 yet. When she's in college, I'll be able to brew a beer with that. But yeah, we do. We grow a lot of elderberry here, currants. We also have lingonberries, so a lot of different things.
Do you have any brews include flowers? Sorry, Roman. I'm like, any brews include flowers? Is that
we have? Yeah. So we've done beers with elderflowers. We did a beer a few years back with locust flowers, which turned out like it gave the beer kind of a Dr. Pepper aroma. It was very interesting. So we've done a little bit with flowers. Yeah.
Birch almost. So there's a lot of people, I think part of these conversations has led to a lot of collaborations and new connections between people. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about around the corner, Crestbell Growers. You're talking about Newton Farms. I was at a meeting last week where Soulfire Farms was also speaking. There's a lot of collaborations and linkages that happen, and that helps to create, I think, strong towns. Like your collaborations with artists. Did we talk about Catskill fungi? Did you? I know you work with
Sorry,
them.
Alex, I got somebody at the door. Just give me 2 seconds.
Take your time. Take your time. Again, we're
You
here.
beat me to my question, Alex.
Sorry, go ahead. Speak.
Said you beat me to my question
Hey, Jeff. About fungi, right?
about the fungi.
What was your? Yeah, good. Yeah.
I was just curious as to what specific strains you might be using.
Yeah. Jeff, for anybody who doesn't know, Jeff is a biologist and also a mycologist. And
Hobby mycologist, amateur at best. but
amateur mic. That's okay.
It is fun.
And Roman, Jeff, and I had a conversation about mushrooms. There's a lot of opportunities for growing shiitakes and many other varieties up here that are delicious and commercially viable. And Jeff, you're also a teacher, right?
I'm a professor down at Rockland Community College of Biology.
Rockland, yeah. I see. I love these meetings that connect with a lot of people, and I'm so happy for that. I'll see you on Saturday at the community gardens plantings. I hope, right? 9 a.m. bright and early, and then there's beer from Westkill Brewery afterwards. So
Tell you what, I'm a transplant, right? So we're a weekend family. I got my daughter's soccer league that is absolutely killing me on trying to get upstate for the weekends right now. Practice Saturdays, game Sundays. So we'll see you there in a couple of weeks when her season ends.
okay,
It's frustrating at best, but she's doing well. So I guess I'm not going to complain too loud.
that's good. Yeah. Excellent.
Sorry
So
about
go ahead. No problem. We were actually just talking about fungi with Jeff,
Oh, nice.
our neighbor next door. And so Catskill Fungi, how did that collaboration come about, and what are you doing with them?
So I've always loved mushrooms, and John, I connected with John at a few farmers markets before the brewery opened, and that kind of there was just a lot of conversations and similar ethos, and when we were able to open and do events here, John came and did quite a few walks here on site. So that was really cool. And those kinds of collaborations are a lot of fun too, because we get such a crowd here on the weekends that for artisan, like we've had various artists come up, to set up a table and to say, hey, this is who I am, and to get out in front of people. It's very, very important, and it's a great place to do that. We've hosted a lot of people running for office, to come up and meet people, just because it's such a great space to interact and meet with people, and we have such a volume. We have a couple potters coming in the next couple months to do some kind of Father's Day events with us. So there's just, again, like I say, there's just so much room for collaboration amongst many small businesses.
Right.
And John's just a prime example with Catskill Fungi of how we were able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, you had a question?
I'm just, what specific strains of mushrooms are you actually using in these brews?
So we did a Pilsner with chanterelles, which was excellent. We've done a black lager with chaga mushrooms. We did a stout with reishi mushrooms as well. Reishi was pretty earthy. Chaga had a lot going on. It was pretty complex. The chanterelles was just straight apricot Pilsner. It was wonderful.
And is that going to be out and released again, or is it?
We're in the works with another collaboration, and so right now, just recently, we have a lot of friends in the foraging industry, in the foraging world. Cole being one of them, who's on the call, and we kind of put out the call that we're going to be needing some chanterelles come July. So
very good.
We obviously pay all the foragers that come and bring us mushrooms. So. That's one way to get enough to do what you need.
That's the only way to do it, right?
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that one particularly. Chanterelles are absolutely my favorite.
They're wonderful. They're great.
Book. Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question. What do you do with your spent grain? Do you reuse it in any way?
Yep. So our spent grain goes to a farm called Maple Hill Farms, owned by my brother-in-law. It's here in Lexington. It's a beef farm. So they have beef. It's mostly a maple syrup farm. It's a very large maple farm. Danny Diamond has owned it for many years. Inherited it from his uncle, the Kleins. So they run a very large maple operation. They have beef cows. They raise pigs. So all the spent grain goes to him. Well, not all. About 70% of our spent grain goes to him. Another 30% goes to a man named John Verhoeven, who owns JJF Beef Farm in Jewett. They're one of the vendors at the farmers market. So John is always very excited to come get the grain because his cows love it, and I'm really excited when John comes and gets the grain because usually he brings me, maybe a T-bone and some burger here and there. Yeah.
Roman has made large batches of dog bones out of spent grain.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
My dog loved. That's great. Um, I know you also do food trucks, and those are interesting collaborations, and it seems like they rotate. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so food trucks has been an interesting evolution because, like we said at the beginning of the call, you tell people about this place, and people are kind of like, okay. Well, it took convincing, and we've had a core group of like 9 food trucks. And after our first season, they were like, all right, when can we come back? What weekends are available? And so that's just how it's been. COVID happened, and we were really fortunate when COVID happened in the sense that everything was outside. Everybody could socially distance, and food trucks didn't have festivals to go to, and they are desperately trying it. So we didn't have any want. We had food trucks all last season, but as time went on, the food trucks and the various pop-ups and vendors we've had start to realize, like, hey, it must be a lot to try to keep up with and kind of contain a schedule and things like that regarding a food truck. So we had a really great proposal from one of our regular vendors who are very well known in the restaurant world on putting a permanent food cantina truck here at Westkill. So kind of a permanent, I'm trying to find the best way to compare it, but basically you'd come to Westkill Brewing and there's just this constant restaurant entity that's always here, and they rotate their menu and they change. But all in all, we're still going to have oyster party and things like that, but we're going to have a more permanent food option here with less of the food truck rotation. You also run into situations, and I trust me, I love all of our food truck vendors, but weather doesn't look too great. Next thing you know, food trucks are backing out and you're still getting slammed with people, and people want to eat. So having a more permanent option was good security for us. So coming in the next month or so, you guys will be seeing some announcements regarding who our permanent food situation is going to be, what the menu is going to look like.
Yeah, and I imagine with a single kitchen, will you be building out a kitchen, do you think? Or
so it's all on them. They've bought a massive food trailer, so everything's self-contained inside the trailer. It's basically a food truck that just sits on a concrete slab. So it's just a more, it can be moved, it's mobile, but it's its own situation.
Mhm.
The reason why we don't put in a commercial kitchen, it again rolls all the way back to that watershed issue.
Sure.
That is something that the DEP does regulate when it goes into the ground, and we're on a very it's a big property, but topography does not work in our favor here. Everything kind of flows downhill, so there's not a lot of room for us to install a grease trap. So for us to have a permanent restaurant within the structures of Westkill just isn't feasible. So the food truck option is or trailer just kind of has to be how it goes.
Right. Do you think that there's space for a lot more restaurants in Lexington?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're looking, at Lexington Arts and Science, we're actually looking, we have a couple of potential commercial kitchens available. So if anybody out there knows anybody who wants to operate a commercial kitchen or do ghost kitchen delivery operations, feel free to reach out. So that's super interesting. I like that the collaborations. I want to go back to that idea of collaborating with other breweries. How does a collaboration with other breweries in general? How does that work? What are you looking for with them? Are you looking to produce beers together, or what is that exactly?
Yeah. So I can give you a few examples. So what you try to do is two breweries decide, hey, let's collaborate on something, right? So the big thing, what the big thing that both breweries are getting out of it is marketing, right? So their logo goes on the can, they get tagged in all the advertising, they get promoted. Very rarely is there monetary sharing of the profits. So it's basically a situation of, like, I'll give you an example. We worked with Industrial Arts. Industrial Arts is a very large, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Antonio Delgado is calling me, but I doubt it's him. So basically, the idea is, hey, you collaborate with us, and then we'll come and collaborate with you, right? So we worked with Industrial Arts, very large, high-profile brewery. We decided that what we were going to do is let's do 2 different versions of a smoked beer, so using smoked malt. So we went down to Industrial Arts and we brewed a German-style Helles, and with smoked malt, very lightly smoked malt, and that was brewed on a very large system, and that got distributed through New York City, right? So the benefit for us on our end is now our name's on a can that's distributed around, Manhattan, and is tied with Industrial Arts. Then they came up here and we did a more experimental, darker Doppelbock with smoked malts. And it was that idea of exchange, right? So we're benefiting them with advertisement and promotion through social media and the product, and then they're benefiting us in the same on their end as well. It's also just a lot of fun. So usually what we'll do, like when we get together, we have an archery range here for the staff at the brewery. We're all really into archery. So like the Industrial Arts crew came up and we all shot bows. We taught them how to shoot. We had a bunch of pizzas and then some beers afterwards. So we try to have fun. We do some grilling, we do some barbecuing. We try to make it an event, right? So it's not just you're swinging up, we're brewing a beer and going home. Another thing with collaborations is everybody tries to bring something to the table, right? So our friends own Bunker Brewing up in Portland, Maine. They came down here to us, and we brewed a German-style Goza, which is a salted sour beer. But instead of adding your typical sea salt, we had them bring seaweed from Maine. So we brewed it with Maine seaweed. Then when we went up there to do a beer called Trout Lily, which is a spring Maibach, we brought up the honey, Catskill honey, to do the collaboration. So that's another fun way in which you get to collaborate. Options are endless.
Right. I understand. So you and your wife, Colleen, went into business around the same time. I understand there were some traumatic events at that time which sort of led you into wanting to start a brewery at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about like how that moment materialized? And
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, I'll lead into it by saying the one thing I have learned through this there's lots of things I've learned, but one of the things I've learned, if you're going to if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to establish any business, you have to assume risk. Risk has to be assumed, or else, and risk is always what's going to drive you to try to push for more success and for a better product, right? So when we first came back and started looking at doing this, it's expensive to own a brewery, to open a brewery. Mm-hmm. And, we thought like, start small, and my dad was very much like, we can do this, we can do that. And it's like, but I was like, but the security of teaching is really nice. So maybe I'll go and I'll finish, a master's program in history, and I'll do that, or, and then I'll do this on the weekends and what have you. Which is funny because the reason I left teaching one of the reasons I left was because I very much, and it's totally not knocking any profession in this way. For me, I felt like, especially working with a lot of older teachers, it was like, okay, well, you got to get this so you can get tenure, and then you'll do this and you'll get your time in. And then, if you do this, you can retire when you're 55. And it was like, wow, stuff's really mapped out for me. Okay, cool. So I know what to kind of expect for this next linear amount of time. And there was also a lot of political stuff going on in Boston public schools, and people were getting moved around, and I was low man on the totem pole. So that didn't help the stress either. But still, even when I left, I was nervous about assuming risk. So my wife's father was diagnosed with cancer. And then 9 months later, he died. So he died in November of 2012. And that's when we were starting to work on moving back to New York. So we moved back to New York to start working on renovating what is now the tap room to be our house. And we're going to build a brewery in our sap house. And 2 days after we moved home, my father dropped dead at work, just dropped dead. So we both lost our fathers within 6 months. And it was just kind of like, one was this long lingering kind of, you knew it was coming, but it was a very stressful situation. And the other one was a sledgehammer to the face. And it knocked us off our feet. But when we started to get back up, the idea of taking risks didn't matter. It was like, we got to do this. And if we're going to open a brewery, we're going to open a brewery. No more of this like 2-barrel, 3-barrel brewery. No, we're going to open a 10-barrel brewery, and it's going to be a production brewery, and we're going to have employees, and we're going to be an employer, and we're going to be an actual sustainable business in the Catskills.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. It's interesting because teachers aren't usually associated with taking risks like that, and so it is interesting that it culminated at this moment also. That was.
Well, I'll tell you something that I think a lot of people who are second homeowners or weekenders currently can relate to is we started looking at buying like a little cabin or something up in Maine or the White Mountains. I even looked at building my own space. And, we were driving back one day after looking at a couple properties up there. And my wife said to me, yeah, so Fridays I'll pick you up from, the high school. You'll get in the car, we'll drive up, and we'll get there and we'll be so excited to be there. And then Saturday, it's just like, oh my God, we're here. This is great. Let's get all this stuff done. Let's do all this. And then Sunday, we're going to dread Sunday morning, because Sunday morning leads to Sunday evening.
Sure.
And you're driving back down. And that conversation right there. And she's like, and that'll go on until we, are at a point. And so another point that brings up is, we made that choice to want to live in this beautiful place. I wanted to come back here. My wife's from Wisconsin. But we made the choice to want to come live in the Catskills. But the only feasible way that we could come back to the Catskills was to make our own way. So we had to build a business that sustained us.
Right.
There wasn't much else to come back to job-wise. Right.
You said it yourself before that part of this is affordable housing, creating jobs. You're creating jobs. So for the purposes of like our conversations and the reason why I started having these Wednesday conversations, to highlight and illustrate how artists, how entrepreneurs, how community builders, how we build strong towns. And it's really through this networking, but it's incredible that you actually went whole hog and did it, and you created jobs, and you didn't, you kind of set the fear of taking big risks aside, and just did it. And it's beautifully, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Westkill Brewery, only positive things. Everyone admires the beer, loves it, experience.
Hands down, our number one concern when we wake up and when we go to bed, aside from our daughter, for my wife and I and ourselves, is okay, we got to keep this moving forward, because now there's people who rely on us, right? And so like my 4 full-time, I'm very proud to say that my 4 full-time people, they've all been here a long time. 2 moved up from the city. 1 was a local guy, and the other one came from the Massachusetts border. They all wanted to live here, but how could they live here without fair wages and a fair job and something that was paying them well, where they could buy a house? And we're very proud of the fact that we were able to get to a point where now all 4 employees own property. Their kids are going to school up here. They tell us constantly, which is very humbling, that they're very excited to raise their children here, or to just grow a life here. And it's really important to us that we sustain that we're able to sustain their quality of life. That's our number one concern. And you find that if you build your business as a family and you treat your employees as family, which is something I learned from my parents who are entrepreneurs, and you treat them well, they're going to work double as hard for you, and your product is going to be 10 times better, because they have a vested interest and they care about what the finished product does. They feel like they're part of building it with you.
Sure. And so you say that with your Westkill Brewing hat on, but you also have another hat that you wear, which is the town board. And so you have it very clear, like, how do we create a nurturing environment for the people that work for you? And you do it through making sure your product is good, making sure your customers are happy, making sure the product moves. How do we do it on a town level? How do we make it nurturing for small businesses to come in, for job creation, for affordability, for sustainability, gentrification avoidance. How do we make it so that we satisfy the needs of the poorest people in the community and lift them up along as we revitalize the town, as we make it interesting for tourists, as we invite, like you were saying, that when you arrived, there were no 15 to 20-year-olds. Now there's a lot more. I see some kids making music videos in front of the post office. I need to talk to them. But there's things happening. There's things happening. So how do we make it more nurturing? How do we
Sure.
So
on? I think number one, we have to look at Lexington as a whole, and we have to say to ourselves, look at Lexington now and compare it to other towns in the Catskills. Right now, I hear all the time, people are like, well, man, I go to Margaretville and it's like this, or I go to Roxbury and it's like this, or I go to Wyndham and it's like this. And it's like, okay, sure. Lexington's greatest asset, the single most important asset that Lexington has, are its natural resources. Mm-hmm. So our hiking trails, our public lands, our state lands, Vinegar Hill, the Schoharie, the Westkill, that is the vast majority of why people come here. Yes, people come and they love going to the brewery, but the reality is that the most important thing that Lexington has going for it is some of the best hiking and outdoor experiences in the Northern Catskills, hands down. So we have to always make sure that with whatever we do and wherever our growth goes, that we have to take care of that, monitor that, and make sure that that gets everything it needs. And luckily, there's a lot of agencies and government, state agencies working together to improve that. I think that's step one, or that's kind of focus. Definitely always has to be the focus, right?
Sure.
And then secondly, it's creating this town has always had an immense sense of community. When I was a kid here and there weren't as many new faces, it was a lot of old families, there was still a strong sense of community, and that still carries through to this day. Newton Farm just had their planting of the Three Sisters, and the volunteering was the outpouring was huge, right? So we have to always foster the sense that this is a community where we care about one another and we want to grow and move forward in a healthy, sustainable manner, right? And I think that we have to take care with how that growth goes, because this town has seen in the past how things can get jumbled in the community, or things can even get miscommunicated in the community. And I'll use the example of the Wyndham Falls Drug Rehabilitation Center that's going in. That was a very contentious issue, mostly because there was a poor line of communication with a lot of people going forward. And I think we just have to be very careful about where that growth goes and how we communicate that growth to all the citizens of Lexington, and that everything here is accessible to everybody here, right? So that you can, that my beer here doesn't see any boundary lines. It's everybody's beer, right? And Lexington has to be that as well. So, businesses that go in have to remember, they have to remember that they're hopefully serving a community one way or another, and that you really want that to be the whole community.
Right. One thing that a concept that comes from strong towns, which I learned about recently in my time in Lexington through Ivan Hinneman, who's an architect, and Danny Latham, a planner. A strong town's idea is that if you have the choice between getting one business that brings in 50 jobs versus 50 jobs from 50 small single owner businesses, you definitely want the single owner businesses, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a balance too. You having medium-sized businesses. I think the Falls project, from what I understand, is probably a good thing for the community. I think it'll create some more reason for people to go. Like you said, the accessibility is important, because I think one of the criticisms was that it would be perhaps too expensive and inaccessible for local communities. So that is a very interesting thing. And I am excited to see where these conversations go and how the Hamlet revitalization plan, because in my mind, I think everybody needs to take responsibility for an area that they can walk to, because that walkability aspect is what creates strong communities, because everybody knows their neighbors, and then those neighbors, it's like a spider web. Everybody, you keep going, and those neighbors know their neighbors. So I think the idea of walkability and I think the Hamlet. So in a conversation with Bennett Wine Bennett pointed out that there were only something like 80 people living in the Hamlet, and so why is walkability important? And I think years ago in the 40s and 50s, there were probably hundreds of people living in the Hamlet, and then there were hundreds of visitors. So the fact that there isn't that now doesn't mean we can't go back to this way. And Lexington is really built around the creek and around the natural features. So the idea that, like you pointed out, natural resources and natural features are the reason why people come here. It's the value that we have and what must be preserved. It's also interesting to notice that, like, the road that leads to your brewery and the roads that go through Lexington are all formed around natural features. They're subject to those. So yeah, this has been a great conversation. We're a little bit over 7 o'clock. I like to close up at 7 to respect people's time. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
My son is a brewer in Portland, Oregon. And so I was thinking, this is such a fascinating thing that you're doing. It'd be kind of cool for him to connect up with you, Michael. Would you be open to that sort of thing?
Absolutely, most definitely.
Okay, well, I'll have to get your contact information and have him contact you.
Mike, if you'd like to put your
contact card
there, whatever you'd like to put there, and to
sure,
share.
I can. I'll type my email in the chat too, so
okay,
can grab it.
That'd be great. Thank you. He just opened up his own bar, and
nice.
He's very excited about it.
I love Portland, Oregon. It's so all of our brewing equipment behind me is all built and fabricated in Portland, Oregon.
Well, probably all of his is too. He was the brewmeister at a local place there, and now he's brewing his own amazing Belgian dark triples. They're just fantastic.
Nice. Very cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
So for anybody who doesn't know Mike and Judy Moss, Mike and Judy Moss are local Lexingtonians. They were very active in arts awareness when Lexington House was known as Arts Awareness. Mike is a musician. Judy is a choreographer, dancer, correct? Yeah. Yes. And they split time between Lexington and Westbeth. Westbeth is a J.M. Kaplan Fund trust. It's a massive property in the West Village that is it's the home of the arts, and it was right, an artist housing, and it's a pretty incredible place. And I think we have lessons to learn from Westbeth that we can apply in Lexington. And Mike and I are talking about this and seeing what the possibilities might be. So again, a lot of exciting things happening. So Mike, I want to thank you again for your time and for engaging in this this dialogue and discussion. Thank you everybody who participated. And Michael, do you want to close up with anything?
No, I think we covered it all. You know, just thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for where things are headed in Lexington, and we all have a lot of work to do and a lot of work going forward, but it's exciting, good growth. So, you know, let's keep the dialogue moving.
Excellent. And thank you so much for the beer on Saturday. If in case anybody hasn't heard, we're planting gardens in Lexington on Saturday. I'll see you at the town hall at 9 a.m. and then 1 p.m. we'll have some beers. And at some point, I'd love to have Colleen on the show, because I think. Oh
yeah, absolutely. She'd love to be.
Women's input is essential. So again, thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for your great beer, and thanks for sharing your story, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Great conversation.